according to the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics. On the back of this, experts are predicting more dire consequences if the government's economic team fails to come up with a contingency plan to salvage the situation as soon as possible. Joining us now for his informed perspective on this matter is Peter Obi, a former governor of Anambra State and PDP's vice presidential candidate during the 2019 presidential election. Welcome to the program, Mr. Obi. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, sir.
It's good to have you again.
Thank you.
Well, before we talk politics, let's start with recession. Nigerians are, of course, disturbed. Inflation is high. Unemployment rate has gone up. People complain about hunger, a lot of hardship within our communities everywhere. But government officials say, well, this recession will pass, that by the first quarter of next year, we will have gone beyond it, and that the main reason for it is COVID-19 and the contractions, the distortions in the global economy. But the issue is, okay, even if it will go away early next year, what should government do, both in the short term and the long term? Because this is the second recession in 5 years. The third under President Buhari's watch as head of state and a civilian president combined.
Well, thank you, Ruben and team. Thank you for inviting me. Well, I thank you for when you started with recession, because when you were talking about the issue of the campaign and everything, I wanted to say, well, that is, for me, not an issue of discussion today, because we have a recession. For me, yes, I agree that the second recession was as a result of COVID-19. We have 40 countries today that are in recession. All the G7 countries are in recession. All the G20 countries are in recession, except for China and Saudi Arabia. And of course, of all the biggest 10, in terms of population, countries in the world, only China again and Bangladesh is not in recession. If you follow the World Bank position, it's the worst recession. However, you have to look at it with the peculiar to our own. Just like they said that the COVID pandemic affects those who have underlying sickness and problems. The same thing, the recession we're going to go through now has a lot of implications because we have an underlying situation. Before the COVID, we had, in terms of unemployment, one of the worst unemployment rates globally. We're the capital of poverty, having the highest people. We're the capital of adult school children. And as you know, this year we hit 2 new records. We have now the capital of infant mortality, having overtaken India earlier this year. And we're now the capital of drug prevalence at 14.3% as against global figure of 5.3. So you could see that our situation is worse. With the COVID situation, Ruben, a lot of our SMEs have collapsed. So that part of people living in extreme poverty would have worsened. So this recession is going to be a U-curve. Well, people can say we're going to come out of it in first quarter of next year. Ruben, if you're negative and you move from negative to even 1% growth, you're out of it. But you're not out of it because that growth does not guarantee lifting Nigeria, especially putting food on the poor Nigerians or creating jobs. We have been growing before at 1-2%, but it wasn't happening. The unemployment rate, it wasn't happening, the SMEs. So we need to do something more radical. And what do we need to do? If you look at what is happening now, there's a discordant tone between the physical and the monetary side. There's need to do more, especially on the physical side. We are talking about issue of COVID-19 now and comparing ourselves with other countries and everything. Even the stimulus to come out of it, 1, is very low, 2, not even getting to the where it's supposed to get to. If I tell you, using people like transport as an example, that park their vehicles for 6 months, most of whom have borrowed money to buy those vehicles and were paying gradually, or even airlines, all the promises that have been made to them, none of them today have received anything. The small businesses that you hear every day saying we're supporting small businesses, I live in the village, and I can tell you, none of them have seen anything. They only hear it in TV. So we need to do more.
So what do we need to do to exit this recession? You'll recall in 2017, a major factor was a boost in oil prices. That is looking somewhat unlikely since, the COVID-19 pandemic has ravaged the oil sector. What do we need to do to exit this time around?
Actually, in 2019, our exit was based more on reckless borrowing. Because I remember arguing with the minister then, he said he will borrow and spend his way out of. I said, no, you can't do that because you're borrowing and throwing it at consumption. Now we are now faced with where we cannot borrow as we did then. So what we need to do now is reining on fiscal discipline. It is critical because today we still have huge cost of governance. We have to rein in on fiscal discipline. We have to ensure, the fiscal side have to ensure that their policies, their measures and everything get to where it is directed. So if you say you're spending this to support SMEs, it must get there. Right now it's not getting there. You only just hear that this number of resources have been provided for SMEs, this has been provided. But when you go down, even if you go to your village, to your local government, you see that people are not getting it. And I say the quantum again is not enough. If you compare our country and like countries, you will see that we're not providing enough to be able, enough stimulus to be able to take our people out of the recession.
Well, Rufai,
right. I'd like to talk about tax to GDP ratio, which is a very important subject because when you look at our tax to GDP ratio, about 6.1%, and you compare with other countries in the world, I think we have about the lowest or one of the lowest. I think it's only Oman that has a tax to GDP ratio of about 2%. In fact, the OECD, groupings of rich countries in the world, have a threshold that if your tax to GDP ratio is less than 35, 36%, they know that your economy cannot be viable. But we have a tax to GDP ratio of 6%. Benin Republic, just close to us, has tax to GDP ratio of 15%. The threshold on the West African belt is 15%, and Nigeria still suffers about 6.1%. How can we break even this way?
If I get you right, you're talking about tax to GDP ratio.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, well, Rufai, let me tell you, what tax is a very simple thing. The more employment and robust your economy, the more you can earn from tax. You cannot tax unemployed people. If I cannot go to your village and tax people who are unemployed, you have 98 million people living under poverty before the COVID situation. Now you're going to have over 100 living under poverty. You're not going to tax them. If you want, it taxes like a bank account. If you want to withdraw more, you put in more. So if the government had done the right things, the more people you pull out of poverty, the more you can get out of tax. It's a simple thing. It's not a rocket science. I give you an example. If you look at, let me go back to a huge economy like China. China today finances their budget, annual budget of about 3.8 trillion from tax of 80%. That 80% tax, their MSMEs, micro small businesses, contribute over 50% of that 80%. So you're talking about 1.6 trillion because they have a thriving, robust SMEs. So the more you can put people, if you look at our tax net today, the people that are employed in Nigeria is about 50% of those that are supposed to be working. So if you put the other 50% into the net, you increase your tax overnight. So anybody who tells you that, oh, tax to GDP ratio, that is nonsensical. It's not an argument. It's a very sad argument. If you want more tax, you give people job. People can't pay you by not doing anything. In fact, people are being overtaxed in Nigeria because that's why MSMEs are collapsing, because there's not a lot of them. What you need to do is to create great environment where there will be so many businesses employing people, support the engine of growth in any economy. MSMEs, the more they can employ people, create jobs, the more you can be able to rake in more tax. Otherwise, you can't get more tax.
Well, Mr. Obi, one major point of defense that government officials put up is that, well, we can't complain too much about the recession in which we have found ourselves now, and that in fact we should be happy because we are doing much better than other countries of the world. France has the economy has contracted by about 13.8%, Germany by 10.1%, Canada by 12%, US and Japan by 7.6%. But here in Nigeria, we're just talking about 3.6%. India has the highest contraction in the world, and that is due to the creativity of the government, the economic sustainability plan, the 100 million jobs over 10 years for a program, the 1,000 jobs in 777 local governments. These are some of the policies put in place by the Nigerian government, and that all of that, so far will seem to have helped to make the Nigerian experience much better than what we have in some of those other countries. What do you say to that?
Yeah, Ruben, when we talk about these things, it's just because we know that people don't, maybe the larger part of Nigeria might not even be watching TV, talk less of following up with what they're talking, because for me, it's something you don't even need to compare. You cannot talk about UK having 20% negative growth against Nigeria 3.something%. UK economy is an economy with $40,000 per capita income. Japan is over $50,000 per capita income. US is $48,000 per capita income. We are under 2,000. So you cannot be comparing us with this people. Ruben is like me. It's like you having $40,000, and maybe you by
and anything, I compare with someone you with.
Sorry, you have 40,000, and all of a sudden I have 2,000, and then you lose say 10,000, and I say, oh, but Ruben lost 10,000, but my 2 is gone. I'm on the streets. You cannot compare this economy. Look at what UK is doing. They are paying people for sitting down at home without going to work. They are supporting people with all sorts of things. They are paying people's rent. US is doing the same thing. They are saying in the UK now, you don't pay rent, you don't pay mortgage, you don't pay. Government is doing all that. It's a robust economy. You can't compare China, us with Japan. The countries you mentioned now, you mentioned US. The world economy is a total of about 81 trillion GDP. US economy constitutes, Ruben, nearly 20% of that. And we are tiny below 0.4%, below 1%. Germany, if you put UK, US, Japan, Germany, and China, is over 50% of the world economy. These 4 countries. And 3 of them are the ones you mentioned now. You can't compare with Germany at almost $55,000 per capita. Let's even go to India. Yes, we have this similar per capita with India. Ruben, In 2014-15, India was the capital of poverty in the world. By 2017-2018, they handed it over to Nigeria. They were able to pull over 200 million people within 3 years out of poverty. This year, they've handed over us the baton of the highest in infant mortality. And to show you that they are committed even in fighting the recession they went into and the COVID situation, India is spending 300 billion, 10% of their GDP, to be able, as a stimulus, to come out of it. Out of 300 billion, 50 billion alone is going to micro, small, medium businesses. In our own case, Ruben, our entire support. So if you told us that India is 1.4 billion today, if you take it that India is 1.4 billion today, we are 1/7 of India. That means our own stimulus divide 300 billion would have been about 42 billion. But you know what our stimulus is in, Ruben? 5 billion. Which I said is too low. And you can't pull this in. It's like having a truck that I've said that fell into a ditch and you're going to pull it out with a smaller, something that wouldn't even pull it out. They might all end up in the same ditch. So, India, yes, they have the worst recession, but they are trying to pull themselves out by doing the right things. As for the other countries, don't compare us with them at all. They have what it takes. Of all the countries that I said that are in recession, 40 of them, Ruben, only about 8. Can you say I have per capita that is below $10,000? And we and India are the lower bottom. The rest, Peru, Turkey, these things are all. But in stimulus package, all of them, South Africa, we're not even getting near 50% of the list of them. And they have smaller population.
Well, we certainly have not had a furlough scheme, or we've had a modest economic stimulus. But speaking of comparisons, you've been quoted recently as saying that this recession will be worse than the recession of 2016 because the money we have borrowed was not properly invested. I'd like you to expand on that.
No, it's not something, it's not something that is rocket science. You could see it yourself. Because the money we borrowed to come out of that recession was not properly invested, that is why now we're using about 90% of our revenue to service debt. There's no country I know, maybe my studies haven't reached there, that is using this amount to service debt. What it is it's a very simple thing. If you have 1 million today, and you borrow another 1 million, your assets is supposed to be valued at 2 million minimum. And if you've invested the additional 1 million, that means you're going to have a productivity of 2 million. So it becomes easier for you to be able to service the debt component of that 1 million. But where you've borrowed 1 million to add to your original 1 million, and you're now valued at 900,000, then you've thrown away the 1 million. That's what happened to us. We have borrowed, our GDP was over 400 billion as of 2010. We borrowed nearly 100 billion, and we are still at 390. So there's something that's gone wrong with the money we borrowed. It was thrown away. And that is what I call consumption. You cannot borrow for consumption. You borrow for productivity. If you borrow for consumption, then you will be where we are. We wasted the money. People can tell you lots of things. We borrowed it for this, we borrowed it for capital. I'm not arguing with that. I just said, can we audit this borrowing? Counterpose it with the capital projects and say, this is it. People borrow money, even in my house, my children on this, say, Dad, we want to go and buy this. And I give you money. They come back and say, this is what we bought with it. You know? It's simple. Even if it's a dress, that money you gave me, I bought this. And I can see. So tomorrow I say, where is that one you bought last time I gave you money? So let us see what we bought with this one. That's all. We're not asking you. It's not a, you see, what happens in this country is baffling is that when you ask people to account for something, it becomes difficult. It's not a rocket science. If I give you just, say, 2,000, and you go down and buy something with it, it's a very easy thing. This happens every day. Me and my daughter will say, I'm going out with, let's say 1,000. He comes back and say, I bought this croissant, it's just 700. I say, it's expensive. I can say that, but let's even see that small one. So we can evaluate it. We've borrowed money. It is money borrowed. Let's see what we use it for.
Okay, sir. I'd like to talk to you, and you raised a very good point. I'd like to talk to you about debt to GDP ratio, because that's one argument that is so quick to be made in the government quarters as regards the fact that Nigeria has a low debt to GDP ratio, and that means Nigeria doesn't have a debt problem, but it has a revenue problem. In fact, they go further to say debt to GDP ratio for Japan, for instance, is over 200%, ours is just less than 30-40%, and the likes. I mean, what's your take on those arguments when people make those arguments?
Again, my brother is nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. Debt is not a problem. What is the problem is what you use the debt to do. Creating debt is not a problem. You just talked about debt to GDP ratio of Japan, debt to GDP ratio of America, debt to GDP ratio of Singapore. Let me tell you, Japan debt to GDP ratio today is over 200. But I said it before, let me tell you, today, the highest holder of US treasuries is Japan. Go and check it, the highest holder. And go and look at Japan's GDP. It was mainly borrowed to stimulate the economy and keep the economy going. Even the holder of their bonds and debts are mainly Japanese people. So you cannot compare the two at all. It's like saying debt to GDP ratio of Singapore that we always use. Today, debt to GDP ratio of Singapore is over 100%. But I can tell you, there's a law that says it clearly. You cannot borrow in Singapore unless you are investing it. So those debts that you see are invested. Singapore today, they used to have the biggest and the busiest port, which has not been taken over. As I speak to you, Rufai, Singapore is building about the world's biggest port under the sea. So by 2050, you're going to have a big port that is no longer on the surface, but under this. So they're borrowing. You could see where the debt went to. It's same thing in every other country. I'm not talking about borrowing. I'm talking about what did you use the money. So debt to GDP is not an issue. What is the issue is debt to revenue. Because the one you borrowed was thrown away, that's why servicing your debt becomes difficult. If that 100 billion or whatever dollars you borrowed that made your debt to GDP only 25 had been invested, one, Rufai, your per capita in 2010 was $2,300. By 2015, it was $2,500. Today, it's $1,980 or thereabouts. Call it 2,000. Your body showed that you would have by now been able to pull yourself. I can give you at least 18 countries that were below us in terms of GDP, including India, we just referred now. India was at one point at that time just a little bit above 1,000. They are now at 2. So they have all moved on. But even with your borrowing, you headed south. So forget about debt to GDP. There's nothing wrong with that, but the country must now have a fiscal discipline and state that all our borrowing have to be made known to everybody and what we are going to invest it in.
Well, Mr. Obi, let's discuss politics. And let's start with the campaign of the governor of Ebonyi State, David Umahi, from the PDP to the APC. And his excuse, of course, you know the excuse that he gave. One, that the PDP has not been fair to the Southeast. And that two, the PDP is not interested in Igbo presidency in 2023. And he thinks that he is ready to sacrifice his own political ambition to be able to achieve that objective of Igbo presidency in 2023. Is it true that the PDP has not been fair to the Southeast? And what's your take about David Umahi saying he will lead other people, governors and lawmakers and stakeholders out of the PDP into the APC ahead of 2023?
Ruben, the last time I was here was in July. At the peak of COVID-19, the whole world was talking about regigging and retooling their economies, investing in education, investing in health, investing in critical areas that can put food on their people's table. And if you remember, that time Nigeria was preoccupied by Oshomole Obaseke saga. We were preoccupied by Magu suspension, NICF versus minister versus this. At the time, everybody was talking something else. Now we're in recession, Ruben. And our country is becoming physically unviable and becoming unsafe for everybody. We just buried over 40 hardworking farmers. At a time, we need to use agriculture, Ruben, to replace oil as a source of revenue when we talk about diversification. And we are busy talking about the campaign and 2023 election. I wish I would get there. I've chosen not to discuss the campaign or politics. Let's discuss how the average Nigerian can put food on his table. Ruben, I live in Onitsha. So I'm in my village every day. I only came here yesterday. I know if I go to that village, so many people can't eat. So it takes a lot of me. For me now is discussion is economy. How do we put food on people's table? That is the critical thing. How do we keep people safe? What do we do so that people can earn an income? We're not discussing that. We're discussing about who will be this. Agriculture, for example, that we are killing our farmers, can save us from all this. Netherlands, with a land space of 41.2 square meters, half of Niger State at 76.3, exported last year 110 billion worth of agricultural products, including 10 billion flowers and almost 8 billion vegetable. What we earn from oil is about 12 billion, so we have enough land to even cultivate. So for me, let's discuss the economy.
No, but I get your concern. I get your concern about the economy. But you know, politics and economy go together.
Agree.
And what will happen to the economy from now till 2023 that I talked about has to do with the kind of politics that our leaders play. And you, as a very prominent political leader from the Southeast, I think you should be interested in the fortunes of the party that you co-led in 2019.
Let me ask you a question. How many people were pulled out of poverty because David Umahi left PDP?
Well, he just left. We don't know.
How many people? I want to know. How many people got employment because of that? Ruben, every other country I know is discussing issues that are critical to them. How many people will save because he left PDP? Of course, yes, we've lost somebody who left us. Some other people are coming in. As the election gets nearer, the parties have to decide on which way to go. But I think now the preoccupation and discussion should be, how do we get this place to work? How do we reduce? He hasn't even, in fact, I would have been his champion if he tells me how to reduce the cost of governance. How do we even reduce cost of governance? How do we even reduce waste in our system? Should be our preoccupation. I don't want to discuss the issue of the campaign or anything. My politics now is that there's so many people in this country who don't know where the next meal will come from. And that should be on the front burner.
Well, that is an emergency, especially when the United Nations has listed Nigeria among potential famine hotspots, with countries like Burkina Faso, Yemen, and South Sudan. It's very scary. So how do we reduce the cost of governance? How bold should the government go? What are the drastic steps that we need to take now to trim the fat?
That's what I'm saying. That's what the government should be discussing on a daily basis. The cost of governance in Nigeria is unacceptable anywhere in the world. I've operated it, so I know that the cost is too much. You cannot, there's no way, there's no country that uses, look at the revenue at the federal level, at state level, that uses 20-30% of its revenue as cost of governance. We're still celebrating. People cannot put food on their table, our leaders are still drinking champagne. These are things we should be bothered about. The level of convoys, these things, all in offices that are not functional and everything, these are things we should be concerned of. How do we reduce this? Not so about anybody, the company is not my problem. Anybody can do anything, but we need to talk about cost of governance. We need to reduce it drastically to be able to have money for critical areas of education. What happened with COVID-19 now have shown us our several years of bad leadership and not investing in education and health. You could see it. Countries spending billions in education when we are spending nothing. Indonesia, that is 250 million like us, is putting about 50 billion in education annually. And they are 250 million, we are 200 million. We are not even spending $2 billion. When if we follow it, considering comparing the two populations, we are supposed to be spending at least 35 to 40. That is our entire budget. We're not looking at it. I heard you now talking about imported cars, non-imported cars, and everything. These are issues we should be concerned. How do we support local manufacturers who employ labor and everything to be able to do something? As governor had to go to Nursing, buy his vehicles for all our schools, buy all of his vehicles for all our traditional rulers, buy all his vehicles for, and go on, so on, just to support him. And he's employing over 7,000. That's what we need to do. How do we ensure that we turn around our SMEs? We need to make the economy productive. And making it productive is not rocket science, Ruben. All we need to do, go and check out nations where debt should increase in private sector. South Africa debt is 490 billion in private sector, compared to less than half of that for the public sector. That shows an economy that is working. In our own, is the reverse. The public sector that doesn't know how to manage is one owing more. So let's support the engine of growth, small businesses. It is not rocket science.
Okay, sir. Concerning, economic viability of every nation, there is a need for access transportation. And the thrust of my question is going to be about road and rail and how can we effectively develop this. Nigeria has over 900,000 square meters of land, but yet we just have a little over 190,000 square meters of roads, which a sizable portion of those roads are bad. The Minister of Works recently came out to say that we need about 50 billion annually to fix those roads. Rails, we have less than 20,000 kilometers for 900,000 square kilometers of land. How can we fix this? How can we bring the private sector in? How can we ensure that we have roads and rail to be able to carry our agri produce from coast to coast in this country?
Rufai, you are actually answering how do we bring the private sector in? What we need is not provide the minister with additional money, but bring the private sector to drive the process, be able to go to capital market, raise the necessary funding, do the construction, and do what is happening in every other country. We celebrate Dubai every day. Every road in Dubai is tolled. You might not see the toll gates, but they're all tolled as you're going. So, and Nigerians are willing to ride and drive around in a good road and toll it. If you go to India, go to all the other countries that are like us, China and everywhere, roads are built and tolled, but you have to have, it must be private sector led so that you reduce the transaction side of it and make it more effective. Government gets involved in those things because of the transaction. Government is just to support and make sure that there. It's not a rocket science. This has been done in other countries. I don't know why it is difficult to do them here. And I can say that in my own small state, it's been done. You can do it. It's not a rocket science. So it's not as if what we need is to have people who are competent and well creators to be able to drive this process. Everything here is difficult. If you say power now, they say, oh, we're in darkness. Providing power is not rocket science. It's been done in every other country. Let's just do what every other person is doing. Get this economy productive. This economy is not productive where we have people making money without producing anything.
Well, Mr. V, just before we go, I would like you to talk about the NSAS protest. Within the context of the fact that your name came up at the Anambra Judicial Panel of Inquiry, one gentleman had submitted a 5-page petition in which he accused you of aiding and abetting police brutality when you were governor, and that you converted a certain park, Use Park, to Nichamoto Park, and that subsequently you went ahead and gave orders that his hotel should be demolished. And the story out there is that the panel of inquiry is likely to summon you. Where are we with that? And you do actually at any point as governor aid and abet police brutality?
Thank you very much, Ruben, for that question. I thank you very, very sincerely. Let me first tell you, I'm waiting for the panel invitation. Because if they invite me, I believe that those of us who have been in government should be able to answer for the actions, especially when we leave office, because it will help in building. And that's what democracy is all about. Number two is to tell you, luckily, as you know, I was in an opposition party. And you were in government as part of what I'm an opposition party. So there's no way I could have had command of police. I don't even know, Ruben, to tell you how it is, I don't even know how they change police commissioner and bring new one. I was just telling somebody the other day that my ADC is the best ADC anybody can get in Nigeria. He said, where is it from? I said, it's from Kano. He said, how did you get him? I said, I don't know. I just posted him one day to me. He came and said, it's the ADC. I said, okay, fine. But the man was such a nice fellow, nice person. We became very close and everything. So I don't even know how my ADC is posted or my police people working with me is posted. Talk less of giving police command and everything. No. Ruben, I don't want to talk anything else, so I don't print what will happen in the tribunal. But I can tell you, if there's anything, I saved the life of that gentleman. He said so, his people are against him and everything. Ruben, I was a man freeze and I saw a security report that 2 human heads with blood dripping over there have been found in a hotel in Onitsha with catch of AK-47. Of course. What is my own? And that the people have surrounded to burn down the house, burn down this and everything. What I normally do in this type of thing is to manage the situation. Because we had already had a code, you can call a rule that if we find a house being used by kidnappers and everything, that we should pull it down. In this case, there was 2 human bodies. And you know, when Nigerians discuss money, we're not even talking about who said that those things. Because imagine how what it would be to come in here and see 2 human heads dripping with blood. I don't think people will allow this place to stay, again. So that was what happened. But I leave it to Tribunal. I never heard that police. Ruben, I'm one person that can say I've never been where people are discussing even how to slap anybody. For me, it doesn't make sense. I was in opposition party. Even it's me that they're using police against. And in my relationship with police while I was governor, ends with police commissioner. The hierarchy of police. I don't know how I'm going to use them to brutalize who.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Peter Obi, for joining us this morning on The Morning Show.
Thank
you for your time.